Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we've got kind of a mixed bag of topics that you sent our way. Some pretty intense stuff, some hopeful stuff, all very much relevant, I think, to life in California these days. So we're talking wildfires, a whole
Wow.
bunch of new laws hitting the books, and then this kind of surprising turnaround in Baltimore that might just spark some ideas.
Yeah, it's amazing how these seemingly, separate events actually all connect to these bigger trends that we're all grappling with.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in, I guess, with those wildfires. It's almost like a yearly event here in California,
Hmm.
but these recent ones just feel especially intense. The articles you shared paint a pretty grim picture of LA County, over 80,000 people evacuated, 300,000 without power. And those winds, oh my gosh,
It's a lot.
it's a recipe for disaster,
Yeah.
really. When you've got those Santa Ana winds, those super powerful dry winds that come down from the mountains,
Yeah.
they can get up to 100 miles per hour and they just whip those flames into a frenzy.
Yeah.
And then you add the drought that we've been dealing with. If everything's dried out, it's like a tinderbox just waiting for a spark.
Yeah. And it's not just about, the acres burned, it's the human impact that really hits home. That Top 5 Stories article mentioned the Palisades fire. It tore through Pacific Palisades, destroyed over 1,000 structures. I mean, can you imagine losing your home, everything you've worked for, in the blink of an eye? And it's not just everyday folks. We're talking high-profile residents in Malibu having to flee.
Yeah, and the wind, it's not just fueling the flames, it's making it almost impossible for firefighters to battle these things from the air. They're essentially grounded, having to face these infernos head on with very limited resources. That article mentioned over 1,400 firefighters battling these conditions. It's incredibly dangerous work.
It is. And tragically, the Eaton fire in Pasadena claimed 2 lives, over 1,000 buildings destroyed in that one alone. It's just a stark reminder of how quickly these fires can spread, how crucial it is to be prepared, have an evacuation plan ready to go.
It makes you think
Yeah.
about how we build in these fire-prone areas, the role of controlled burns in managing vegetation,
Mhm.
and of course the bigger picture of climate change and how that's contributing to these more extreme conditions.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a wake-up call. But speaking of change, let's shift gears a little bit to these 14 new California laws coming into effect. This is the kind of stuff that could directly impact your day-to-day life. So let's break down some of the most interesting ones.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
first up, we've got AB 2622. This one's pretty practical for any homeowners out there. It raises that dollar limit for home projects that require a licensed contractor. So if you're thinking about renovations repairs, this one's for you.
Yeah. So before it's $500, now it's $1,000.
Yeah.
It kind of reflects the reality of, rising costs for labor and materials these days.
Makes sense. Then we've got AB 413, which I think we can all get behind. Cracks down on people parking too close to crosswalks, which is a huge safety hazard for everyone.
Right.
Drivers, pedestrians, obstructed views, never a good thing.
For sure. A step towards safer streets for everyone and a good reminder to just be mindful of where we park.
Absolutely. Now, this next one could be a game changer for anyone struggling with medical debt. SB 1061, it protects credit scores from being dinged by medical expenses. It's a huge relief for folks who might be facing financial hardship due to illness or injury.
Right. Because medical debt, it's often not a result of irresponsibility, right? It's
Yeah.
just the high cost of healthcare and, those unexpected life events that can happen.
Exactly. And then there's AB 2863, which targets those annoying subscription traps, those free trials that turn into paid subscriptions if you forget to cancel them. This law basically requires companies to get your clear consent before they start charging you.
More transparency, more consumer protection. I think we can all appreciate that.
For sure. Okay. Now, this next one might spark some debate. AB 1825. It's also called the Freedom to Read Act. It prohibits public libraries from banning books based on things like race, nationality, or political viewpoints.
It really gets at the heart of intellectual freedom, and the role of libraries in a society like ours. Who gets to decide what we read and on what grounds?
Those are big questions. And speaking of important conversations, AB 1815 expands civil rights to include hair texture and protective hairstyles. So it aims to prevent discrimination based on how someone chooses to wear their hair.
It's a recognition that our hair is tied to our cultural identity, to our self-expression. It shouldn't be a basis for prejudice.
I agree. Now, I know we have a lot more laws to cover, but before we get to those, let's switch gears to something a little different, but equally fascinating. This story out of Baltimore, a city that's been in the news for all the wrong reasons in the past, but now they're making headlines for a remarkable turnaround. They've managed to significantly reduce their homicide rate. And we're not talking about a small dip, this is a dramatic drop.
The numbers are pretty amazing. Homicides down 23% in 2024. And compared to 2 years ago, it's a 40% decrease.
Yeah.
This isn't just a fluke. It suggests a fundamental change in how they're approaching crime.
So what's the secret? What have they figured out that other cities haven't?
Well, the key seems to be this program called the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, or GVRS.
Yeah.
It's a completely different way of looking at crime. Instead of just focusing on law enforcement and punishment, they're treating violence as a public health issue.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work in practice?
Well, they start by identifying individuals and groups who are at the highest risk of either committing acts of violence or becoming victims themselves. But instead of just arresting them, they offer support and resources, things like job training, mental health services, addiction counseling. It's about addressing the root causes of violence and helping people break the cycle.
So it's not just about cracking down, it's about lifting people up and giving them a chance to turn their lives around.
Exactly. And it seems to be working. Not only have homicides decreased, they've also seen a drop in non-fatal shootings and even fewer emergency room visits related to gun violence. It's a win-win.
It's amazing what can happen when you change your perspective, and focus on prevention and rehabilitation rather than just punishment. I'm curious to learn more about how this program works and if it's something that could be replicated in other cities.
Well, stay tuned. We'll definitely dive into the specifics of GVRS a little later. But first, let's circle back to those new California laws. We've got 9 more to unpack, and some of them are real head-turners.
All right, let's jump back into those new California laws. We got a few more to go through. You ready to tackle some more of these?
Yeah, let's hear them. I'm curious to see what other changes are coming down the pike for Californians.
Okay, how about this one? AB 3209. It basically gives retail stores the ability to get restraining orders against people who've been convicted of stealing from them, vandalizing their property, or even assaulting their employees.
Oh, that's interesting. It seems like a pretty direct response to that rise in retail crime that we've been seeing, and a way to offer more protection to those employees who are often on the front lines of these incidents.
Right, and it makes you wonder, could this be a deterrent for those repeat offenders, or will it just push the problem somewhere else?
Yeah, it's a good question. It'll be interesting to see how this law plays out in practice. What kind of impact does it have on crime rates and that overall sense of safety for retail workers?
Definitely. And speaking of organized retail theft, AB 1779 is designed to tackle that issue head-on. It allows district attorneys from different counties to team up and consolidate charges against suspects involved in those large-scale theft operations.
Ah, that makes sense. Because those criminal rings, they often operate across county lines. So having that more coordinated approach from law enforcement makes it much harder for them to slip through the cracks.
Right. It's about closing those loopholes and holding those organized groups accountable. Okay, now this next one is specifically for all the independent contractors out there. SB 988, it strengthens protections for freelancers and gig workers by requiring that they get paid on time.
Oh, that's a big one. A lot of independent contractors face those challenges with getting paid promptly. This aims to level the playing field a bit, ensures they receive payment either by the date specified in their contract or within 30 days of completing the work if there's no specific date.
Right. It's about time freelancers deserve that same respect and financial security. Okay, and for a quick but important update, minimum wage in California just got a boost.
Yep. As of January 1st, it's up to $16.50 an hour. It's part of that multi-year plan to gradually increase the minimum wage, keeping pace with the cost of living and ensuring that Californians can actually earn a livable wage.
Good news for those folks. Now let's talk about AB 2347. This one gives renters a little more breathing room when it comes to evictions. It extends that time they have to respond to an eviction notice from 5 to 10 business days.
Oh, that's good. That extra time can be so crucial. It allows tenants more of an opportunity to seek legal advice, gather documentation, and potentially challenge that eviction, especially in cases where it might be disputed.
Yeah, gives them a fighting chance, helps prevent those unfair evictions. Okay, and last but not least, we have SB 1137. This one clarifies that California's anti-discrimination laws apply even when multiple forms of discrimination kind of intersect.
So it's recognizing that discrimination isn't always so black and white. People can experience bias based on multiple factors.
Yeah.
Their race, their gender, sexual orientation, disability. This law makes sure that those individuals with intersecting identities have legal recourse if they face discrimination.
It's about acknowledging the complexities of discrimination and ensuring that everyone is protected regardless of background or identity.
A powerful message about inclusivity and equal rights for all Californians.
It is. It's interesting, isn't it, how these new laws, along with those wildfires and even that story out of Baltimore, they all connect to this idea of resilience.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like whether it's those communities rebuilding after a fire, lawmakers trying to address societal issues through legislation, or a city finding these innovative ways to reduce crime, there's this common thread of adapting, overcoming challenges, finding solutions.
And speaking of resilience, let's not forget those incredible firefighters on the front lines of those California wildfires, over 1,400 of them battling those intense blazes, risking their lives to protect people and property. That's courage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're the true heroes. And their efforts really highlight how important preparedness is, both on an individual level and as a community. Having an evacuation plan, knowing what to do in an emergency, being aware of the risks, it can make all the difference.
It's true. We can't always control what happens, but we can control how we prepare and respond. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, we've talked about wildfires, new laws, crime-fighting strategies. I want to go back to that Baltimore story and that program they're using to tackle violence.
You mean the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, GVRS? Yeah, it's definitely worth taking a closer look.
Absolutely. Let's dive into the specifics. How does it work? What makes it so effective? Is it a model that other cities could adopt?
Great idea. Such a fascinating example of how shifting our perspective, and focusing on those community-based solutions can lead to real and lasting change.
So you mentioned that the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, GVRS, takes this completely different approach to crime.
Yeah, it shifts away from that traditional tough-on-crime stance and treats violence as like a public health crisis, kind of how we'd approach a disease outbreak.
That's interesting. So how do they actually, diagnose and treat this violence epidemic?
Well, they use data. They analyze crime stats very carefully to identify those specific micro-locations where violence is most concentrated. It's not about targeting entire neighborhoods, but pinpointing those hotspots.
So they're being very strategic.
Exactly. And then the community engagement piece comes in. They actually reach out to individuals who are identified as being at high risk of, either engaging in or becoming victims of violence.
So if those who maybe have a history of violence or are involved in gangs.
Well, it could be, but it's not always that clear-cut. They look at social factors, too, like unemployment, poverty, lack of education, even exposure to trauma. The things that create that breeding ground for violence.
So it's about understanding the context.
Right. Recognizing that these individuals are often products of their environment.
Right.
And here's the interesting part. Instead of just arresting them or punishing them, they offer a genuine alternative. They sit down with these individuals and say, look, we know you're at risk. We want to help you change your life.
Wow. So it's like an intervention. But instead of substance abuse, they're tackling violence.
Yeah, good analogy. And they connect these folks with a whole network of support services. Job training, educational opportunities, mental health counseling, even help with housing. They address those root causes and try to give them the tools to build a better life.
So it's not just about coddling them, it's empowering them to make different choices.
Exactly. And it's not just about the individuals either. They work with community leaders, faith-based organizations, even former gang members, to create that culture of nonviolence and those positive alternatives.
Sounds very holistic. Not just law enforcement, the whole community coming together.
Right. Yeah. And that's a big part of why it works. It's about building trust. It takes time to build those relationships. But it's crucial for people to feel safe and supported enough to embrace change.
These programs, though, they need funding and political will to really work, right?
Absolutely. Sustained investment is key. It's not a quick fix. It's about a long-term commitment to changing the fabric of a community.
Makes you wonder, though, can this work in other cities with different demographics and different challenges?
That's the million-dollar question. It's not one size fits all. But what Baltimore is showing us is that it is possible to make a difference in violent crime by shifting that focus from punishment to prevention and investing in those communities.
And it goes back to that resilience theme again, right? Finding solutions, adapting, and never giving up.
For sure. Whether it's firefighters, wildfires, lawmakers, policies, communities, healing and rebuilding, it's about that human capacity for resilience.
It's a powerful reminder that even facing tough times, we can adapt and innovate and create a better future.
When it starts with staying informed, having those conversations, and challenging the status quo.
Well said. We've covered a lot today. Wildfires, new laws, this incredible story in Baltimore. What a deep dive.
It's all about you, the listener. These stories shape your world, the challenges you face, the opportunities out there.
So what will you do with this knowledge? Share it. Advocate for change. Prepare yourself and your community.
Those are the questions we hope this deep dive has sparked, because it's not just about absorbing the info, it's about understanding it, applying it, and creating a more informed and resilient future.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. As you navigate this complex world, remember that even small actions can ripple outwards. Be curious, be compassionate, and never underestimate your power to make a difference.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep seeking out those nuggets of knowledge that can spark positive change.
That's a wrap for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.